Everyone, briefing afternoon PM session. I just thought I would start by saying thanks to Sharon for hosting this morning in my absence. Hope the discussion went well, and I'll give you an update on the school's principals meeting later in the day as well, which Ben was a part of, which was a good meeting with the Minister. So yeah, thanks for coming along today. George and Ben, trees for tomorrow, engagement summary and ecosystems info. I'll hand the floor over to two of you.
Kia ora tātou. Thanks for having us here to talk to you today about the Trees for Tomorrow engagement. So just to remind everyone, we presented at the council briefing on the 4th of September some very early policy ideas about the review and update of the vegetation and tree management policy and the policy manual. This was really just some high level thinking, which we'd heard some information from Simon Upton, the Parliamentary Commissioner from the Environment. There was an urban forest symposium at the University of Canterbury with Scion, and some changes with our neighbours in their tree policy, and we were directed by the then Planning and Climate Change Committee to look at the tree policy in response to some projects and trees in general. So following the briefing, council staff went away and developed a survey, and this focused on trees on public land managed by council, so reflecting the scope of the tree policy. And this engagement took place between the 18th of September and the 6th of October, so we went to work pretty quickly after that briefing to test those policy ideas with the communities and get some general steer on how the community feel about trees, particularly public trees. So the Trees for Tomorrow engagement, it was structured around these key policy ideas: planting and tree cover, caring for our trees, which is really maintenance, tree removal and replacement, and retaining and working around trees. Those are the four policy areas. The current tree and vegetation policy has those three of the four sections. It has a planting section, maintenance section, the removal section. So the only thing new is the more direction on what we do about replacing what we remove, and we're trying to retain trees, look after the trees that we have and how we work around them. So there are 13 questions in the survey. 8 of these questions were multiple choice, and all the multiple choice questions had an other option. So there's the free text option where survey respondents can put their own ideas in, and there was usually after each question or section of questions, if they were related, there was a free text option as well. And at the end of the survey, the last curve, it was quite an open survey, and it brought a lot of feedback in. So it reached quite a few people. There were 987 visits to the Trees for Tomorrow page on Your Say Selwyn, and that worked out as 138 completed surveys on that platform with 3 email submissions. So the memorandum today is really just to introduce the high-level summary report of that engagement. It doesn't go into the detail, it's on a question-by-question basis, but we're starting to see some themes that come out across the questions. So one example would be more community involvement, and that's in the strategy and plan-making stage, all the way down to key projects, which might not be focused on trees, but have tree or planting vegetation requirements to removal. So we want to do some kind of cross-question theming as well in the new year. But the engagement summary report in front of you today is just on a question by question basis. There's quite a few themes that are spanning across them. So I'll just go over a few high level results, but really the report's for your information, and you can, if you haven't already, have a look at that and drill down into the detail a bit more. But there's a lot of support for more planting and canopy cover. There's a recognition that there was a general need for more trees across the district in different locations, and how they'll become increasingly important in the future. So I think survey respondents were really future focused. They were thinking about changes that are happening now, such as climate change, and also just more dense development in urban areas, which is limiting the options for trees on private land, and what the public realm kind of needs to pick up the tab. Also, something that came out which was really quite interesting, and it was introduced through some of the preamble text on the Your Say page, was the right tree in the right place principle. So it came out in 2 ways. Firstly, I think a lot of our community were really pragmatic. There was a lot of support for trees, and some other respondents saw trees as more of a barrier to development and progress. But either way, there was pragmatism in the sense that, yes, we need some trees, but they shouldn't hinder development, or we need a lot more trees, but it's about the right tree in the right place. So there's general agreement that removal is a last option, but it's not off the table. Some trees do need to come out. It's about trying to maintain healthy, mature trees that are in the right places. So I think there's a real pragmatism that it's about trying to retain the trees that we have, make sure that new trees are going in the right location, so the right tree in the right place when it comes to planting new trees. Another thing that came out through the survey was about kind of tree selection, which is in keeping with that right tree in the right place. They're thinking about different heights, different ages, different species, and some other characteristics and properties, whether they're deciduous, particularly next to roads, evergreen, and some areas to make sure there's not loads of leaf litter, so low maintenance, hardy trees, drought tolerant trees, thinking about different soils. I think a lot of our communities know the area so well and they know what works and what doesn't work, so there's some really helpful feedback to pass on. There's a lot of information about the value of trees, and it transcended the biophysical about shade and birds. There was a huge amount of responses about wanting to see more native birds in the district, particularly in the towns, but also some more of those intangible attachments. So this is the tree that my kids run around, play tag and climb on the walk back from school. It's important to me. People saying they were quite sad about tree removals that have happened, and wanting some more transparency about, okay, if we're having a replacement policy, which is in the current tree policy about having replacement trees for trees removed, where are those trees going? So we communicate when trees come out, this is where the replacement trees are. So I think our community generally wanted to understand some of our tree management decision making and be more involved. There was a huge piece about community involvement, not just for removals, but for new plantings. So community are really passionate about particular tree species, particular trees in particular areas. Also stronger requirements through the land development process about how, when we have greenfield development, we can make sure that there's healthy, mature trees that are retained if they're to be vested in council on what will be reserved land, or requiring new plantings and essentially becoming intergenerational assets for the community, the wider community. And I think I've already touched on it, but community involvement, and this spanned loads of different ideas, but involved in the decision making on new plantings and removals, but generally looking after trees and looking after their own communities. There are quite a few people said that they've been watering the trees in new subdivisions, trying to do some of the maintenance there, caring for the trees in the area, and how we could help support that, having more of the community kind of look after their own area and create a real community spirit around trees. So yeah, some really interesting insights from the engagement, and that, just to let you know the results, we're really upfront that part of the engagement was to test these early policy ideas, help us have a tree policy that's pragmatic for operational requirements, but reflects what the community wants and what they value. And we're going to take that forward into developing the final options to the update and review of the tree policy. So I think when the memorandum came out, we didn't have the calendar for the New Year's meetings yet, but we'd like to bring that back the first quarter of next year. So I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I knew that would happen. I just put popcorn in my mouth. So I'm really excited to read this, George. It was absolutely fantastic to see the kind of response that you got, and it wasn't just repetitive, like there was lots of variety within these responses, which I like, and it's the same thing. So I've got 3 things, my usual top number. I love that people ask for mixed tree choices, because we definitely need variety for multiple reasons. So I also love that people talked about the idea of volunteer tree wardens in Selwyn. I think that's definitely a concept we could certainly look into. It's going to be cheaper in the long run rather than putting all the work entirely on our staff. And also to talk about different mapping programs, things like tree mail. I'm not quite sure what that involves, but I mean, let's not reinvent the wheel. Other people have probably got awesome programs already in place. The question for me is, the developers, how are we able to bring this policy to the developers and have it sort of somewhat enforceable? Is that going to mean that it's going to become a bylaw, so that they have to consider retaining the existing notable trees, or tree canopy requirements that need to be planted? How are we able to do this?
That's a great question. There's quite a few options that we'll need to investigate. We've heard from the community quite strongly that they feel that where the tree loss occurring is in the land development process through greenfield subdivision, and they want something done about that. So it's up to staff now with the tree policy to investigate that. I think in the past it's all been about reserve credits and with retaining healthy mature trees, but there's some different options there. So I don't have an answer today, but that's a fantastic question that we have asked ourselves as well to look at.
It can also form part of the area plan work that we do. We can identify those locations where it needs more trees or certain types of trees or certain locations for stuff like that, so that that's flowing through those district plan requirements, and so that the developers will have specific criteria around what trees we need in those certain locations as well.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, has there any work been done on protected trees for the future, you know, so that people know what's about and what they have to do?
Yeah, this work's focusing on the public trees, so the ones that are on our land, and the district plan's got the notable trees in there for the private land that are protected. So whilst it's probably quite a different focus at the moment, but I think that would, again, probably be something we could tie together in the area plan work, where we've got those private trees that are notable, that are significant, that we need to sort of tie together in terms of the story we tell about our towns as well.
Thanks for that question. We had one submission about notable trees in the district plan from the Waihora Park Management Committee, and that's been taken to the policy team leader to talk about looking at the notable trees schedule in the district plan and the process for that. But it's, again, it can be folded into other work programs as well, like the area plan, and when we look at the heritage and identity of different areas. But one thing, a lot of submission points or feedback came in about private trees, notable trees, which were outside of the scope of the Trees for Tomorrow engagement, focused on public trees, but we've made sure that's all passed to the right place because there was lots of helpful feedback. So we've made sure that anything that was not in scopes that focused more on vegetation, reserves and play equipment, notable trees, we've passed that on. So we did an exercise where we said, what is that in scope, but it's still important and needs to make sure it lands somewhere here.
Thank you. Nicole?
Yeah, just picking up on you talking about the district plan trees. I mean, I was on that hearing, so my understanding, is basically trees that were identified mainly by the public, then were put in the district plan. So we are going to be looking at wider on like actual other trees to that maybe should be included as well, or doing some plan in that.
It's probably more a question for the district plan stuff. Like this tree policy and this engagement is focused on the public trees. Additional private tree identification will need to go through a district plan process eventually.
So this is a great piece of work, and I am so pleased to see what's come out of it, and also was good to say about what's kicked it up. I mean, it basically was kicked off in the community here. We've had Markham Way, we're putting in a shared path, and trees will be going to be taken out from that, and same thing had happened at Fairhurst, and people concerned about losing trees. And as we can see from what's come back from the people who have responded, that people are quite passionate about trees, and also even like trees that are in council spaces and everything like that. So it's great to see we've actually got some data, and obviously with something like this as a questionnaire, would expect that people, because it's people have done it themselves, that the people who are really passionate about trees who would answer these sort of questionnaires. But it is a good information for us to use going forward, and to see that we really do need to be looking more in this space. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Nicole. Deborah?
Oh, thank you. I have an understanding of the Waihora submission that went through. It's trying to understand, we have several arboretums within our district. There's some at Lincoln University, there's some on some of our reserves. And I guess when you're looking at an arboretum, there may be a historic process attached to why it was actually planted, the species that have been planted. Unfortunately, what we tend to do is maybe go through an arboretum and say, oh, well, we recognise that species, that species, that species, but we don't tend to recognise the arboretum as a whole. And one tree cannot survive without its neighbour if it's been planted over 100 years ago. So perhaps we need some clarification around individual trees versus arboretums. And we've got one up at Lake Coleridge. That's another arboretum area. So there needs to be some ring fencing and understanding of those arboretums.
Lots of heads. Thank you. And Elizabeth.
Sorry, I forgot the last bit. Are we looking, with the result of this policy, are we going to continue to look at how we can create either winding footpaths or route-friendly footpaths so that trees don't get ripped up because of the footpath distortions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there's a lot of options for what we can do in the road reserve and with streets, because one of the key things, and it did come up through the survey, is about how we are doing the same thing over and over. We're just putting the same surfacing down, and then the tree is still stressed. It hasn't got the right soil volume, and it's still uplifting the footpath. That's a huge barrier for people using, pedestrians, and so we need to do something different. That's what the solutions I think we need to work through. When we have the policy direction, which the tree policy at the moment is quite high level, and it might come down to the engineering code of practice, but there's a lot of new technologies and new solutions and different options as to how we can have trees in areas and not have these conflicts, or at least have these conflicts managed, and it all comes down to the right tree, right place. But yes, those options there, Elizabeth, are some of the new and emerging technologies that we can have, so there can be coexistence. I think we need to look at those, look at the cost of those as well.
Right tree, right place, or right path, right place?
Just following on from what Elizabeth said, we've actually done that at Cream Can Corner. So that's Lincoln, Rolleston Road, well, it was Goulds Road, but that's been cut off. If you happen to look at that tree, which is quite a big established tree, around the base of that where there is a footpath gone in, near to the tree has actually got paving, and behind the tree there is a sort of path, but it's only, I don't even know what you'd call it, this little gravel bits, but it hasn't been built up. So there's been given space for the tree where it is. If you're listening, yeah, a space for the tree, so it's not affecting the roots and such like. And that was one of our arborists, have gone to a lot of detail on that.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to present or tell us about trees today?
Just that, yeah, in the new year we'll use the climate change subcommittee as a kind of a testing ground for some of the drafting of the tree policy to ultimately bring it back to council in that new year.
The final thing I know is that the item on the agenda talks about the ecosystem services modelling, which we haven't presented on today, but there has been a email to councillors some time ago, and it's also a media release to the public about this joint project with Monarchy Whenua Land Care Research to kind of understand the value of vegetation ecosystems, and they had some funding and they were able to extend that to one town, so that was done for Rolleston. So a lot of the values that we heard from the community about the biophysical stuff like sequestering carbon, filtering air pollutants, up in stormwater retention, often these things aren't factored in when we think of what the trees might infringe on, or the cost. There's actually value to the trees, and those can be quantified in the model as ecosystem services, but you can go one further and put it into monetary terms as well, $1 spent here as a return of this. So it'll be really great to do some more work as part of the Blue-Green Network strategic priority of Waikiri Kitua Future Selwyn about the value of trees as well and what they give us back. So I can reshare that link to for everyone to have a look at what value the trees provide in Rolleston.
Thank you. Sophie?
Yeah, sorry, quick question. I'm trying to search where I found it, and maybe Diligent's going to let me see. it was around, there was only one mention of play with trees in here, and I'm just wondering if there was much in the way of responses, just because I remember, so this was a wee while ago with the Youth Council, and they were asking some young people what they would like to see in parks, and so many of them said trees that I can climb. And I get that there's a safety issue there, but that's the sort of thing that I remember enjoying doing. And it's, you know, it's one of those human things. You want to climb up something and you want to get a better view that's taller than your parents and all that sort of thing. But we currently, much of our maintenance, probably for health and safety reasons, is we chop the branches off so that you can't actually reach any branches. And I don't know if there's any way of feeding that in, but it's certainly in terms of activity and maintenance, like, there might be a few candidate trees in play areas where that could be allowed, I would hope, at some point.
Play did come up, and there's one mention in the summary, but there were some other mentions of sport and active rec and play elements as well. And yeah, that nature-based play element is something that we're looking at through our blue-green priority, and it's something that we can definitely see how we could be quite intentional about having trees form part of the play element in reserves, and then they're hard at work as well, and we're maintaining other play equipment, but you could have trees as part of that equipment, and the maintenance cost goes. You get all these other co-benefits as well. So yeah, take that on, Sophie. That's great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to the two of you for presenting.